A village girl betrayed by love, saved by a stranger who holds the power to change everything. If you are just tuning into this channel for the first time, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Also, share with your friends and family. It means the world to us. Grace knelt by the river, her hands trembling as she washed clothes that would never be clean enough to wash away her shame. The water was cold, her tears were warm. They mixed together and disappeared downstream, carrying pieces of her broken heart with them. She had been there since dawn, not because the clothes were dirty, but because she couldn't bear to go home. Home meant facing her mother's disappointed eyes. Home meant explaining why Daniel had left her. Home meant admitting that the man who promised her the world had thrown her away like yesterday's newspaper. The sun was climbing higher, but Grace didn't move. She scrubbed the same shirt over and over, her knuckles raw, her spirit crushed. 3 months ago, she was the happiest girl in Akure village. Daniel had chosen her. Daniel, the son of the richest man in town. Daniel, who drove the only car under 30 that anyone had ever seen. Daniel, who made promises that sounded like prayers. "I'll marry you," he had whispered under the old mango tree. "My father is building a house in Lagos. We'll move there. You'll never have to fetch water again." Grace had believed him. She had given him everything, her body, her dreams, her future. She had walked taller, smiled brighter, ignored the whispers of jealous girls who said she was reaching too high. But yesterday, everything crumbled. She had gone to his house to surprise him with the news that would change everything, the news that made her hands shake and her heart race. She was carrying his child. But when she arrived, she found him on the veranda, not alone, with Precious. Beautiful, light-skinned Precious, whose father owned 3 shops in town. Precious, who had just returned from university. Precious, who was everything Grace was not. They were kissing, not the quick, stolen kisses of teenagers, the deep, hungry kisses of people making promises. Grace had stood there, frozen, her hand on her belly, watching her future disappear. When Daniel saw her, he didn't even look ashamed. He looked annoyed, like she was interrupting something important. "Grace," he said, stepping away from Precious, "what are you doing here?" She couldn't speak. Her voice had disappeared along with her dignity. Precious smiled, the kind of smile that cuts deeper than any knife. "Oh, this is the village girl you were telling me about." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Grace, we need to talk." But Grace didn't wait for the talk. She already knew what he would say. She had seen it in his eyes. The love was gone. It probably never had been there. She turned and ran, and she had been running ever since. Now, kneeling by the river, she finally stopped running. There was nowhere left to go. Grace was still by the river when the sun began its descent. Her clothes lay forgotten in a soggy pile. Her eyes were dry now, empty of tears, empty of hope. She stared at the water and wondered if it would be easier to just walk in and never come out. That's when she heard footsteps. She turned, expecting to see her mother or one of the village women coming to drag her home. Instead, she saw a man she had never seen before. He was tall, dark, with kind eyes and clothes that had seen better days. His shirt was faded, his trousers had patches, but he walked with a quiet confidence that made her forget to look away. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm fine." He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way he tilted his head, the way he studied her face like he was reading a story written in pain. "You've been here since morning." She looked at him sharply. "How do you know?" "I was passing by earlier. I saw you then. I'm passing by now. You're still here." He sat down on a rock a respectful distance away. "I'm David." Grace hesitated. In the village, strangers were either trouble or opportunity. She had learned not to trust either. "Grace," she said finally. They sat in silence for a while. David didn't ask questions. He didn't offer advice. He just sat there, sharing the weight of her sadness without making it heavier. Finally, Grace spoke. "Do you ever wish you could disappear?" David was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "but disappearing doesn't solve anything. It just makes the people who love you search harder. What if no one loves you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "Someone always loves you. You just might not know it yet." Grace laughed bitterly. "Easy to say when you're carrying a baby for a man who just chose someone else." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She covered her mouth, horrified. She hadn't told anyone, not even her mother. David didn't gasp. He didn't judge. He just nodded slowly. "How far along?" "2 months," she whispered. "And the father?" "Gone. He found someone better." David stood up slowly. He walked to the water's edge, picked up a smooth stone, and threw it across the surface. It skipped 4 times before sinking. "You know what I've learned?" he said, his back still turned. "The people who abandon you when you need them most were never meant to stay. They were just meant to show you what you don't want." Grace felt something shift in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. "What do you want?" David asked, turning back to her. It was such a simple question, but Grace realized she had never asked herself that. She had wanted what Daniel wanted, what her mother wanted, what the village expected. "I want to matter," she said quietly. "I want to matter to someone." David smiled then. It was the first real smile she had seen in days. "You already do." David helped Grace gather her wet clothes. He didn't ask more questions, didn't push for details. He simply walked beside her as they headed back toward the village, carrying the heavy basket like it weighed nothing. As they walked, Grace found herself stealing glances at him. There was something different about this man. He didn't walk like the village men, with their shoulders hunched and their eyes always looking down. He walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. "Are you from around here?" she asked. "Not originally," he said. "I'm just passing through." "Where are you staying?" David paused. "I was hoping you might know someone who rents rooms." Grace almost laughed. "This is Akura Village. Nobody rents rooms. We barely have enough rooms for ourselves." They had reached the edge of the village. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grace could see her mother's house in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney. Soon, her mother would start calling her name. "You can sleep in our boys' quarters," Grace heard herself saying. "It's not much, but it's clean." David stopped walking. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," Grace said quickly. Then, more quietly, "I could use the company." That night, Grace's mother, Faith, prepared dinner for 3 instead of 2. She didn't ask many questions about the stranger her daughter had brought home. She simply served him the largest portion of rice and the best piece of meat, the way she had been taught to treat guests. David ate like he hadn't eaten in days. He complimented Faith's cooking, asked about the village, listened to her stories with genuine interest. Grace watched him from across the table, wondering who this man really was. After dinner, as Faith cleared the dishes, David pulled out a small wad of money and placed it on the table. "For the room and the food." Faith's eyes widened. It was more money than she made in a month selling vegetables at the local market. "This is too much," she protested. It's exactly right, David said firmly. Thank you for your kindness. Later, as Grace walked him to the boys' quarters behind the house, she couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. That money, she said. Where did you get it? David was quiet for a moment. I work hard, he said finally. Doing what? Different things, whatever needs to be done. It wasn't really an answer, but Grace didn't push. She had secrets too. At the door of the small room, David turned to her. Grace, he said, whatever you're running from, whatever you're afraid of, it doesn't define you. You get to choose who you become. Grace felt tears threatening again, but these were different tears. Not tears of despair, but tears of something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. 3 days later, the entire village was buzzing with news that would change everything. Grace was at the market with her mother when the announcement came. Chief Adebayo, the village head, stood in the center of the square, his voice carrying over the crowd of confused villagers. A company from Lagos has bought our land, he announced. All of it, the entire village. The crowd erupted. Voices rose in anger, fear, confusion. Grace grabbed her mother's arm. What does that mean? Someone shouted. It means we have to leave, Chief Adebayo said, his voice heavy. They're building a resort. They've given us 3 months to relocate. Grace felt the world spinning around her. This was her home, the only home she had ever known. Where would they go? How would they survive? What about compensation? A voice called out. It's not much. The crowd grew angrier. People were shouting, children were crying, old women were wailing. Grace looked around at the faces of her neighbors, her friends, her entire world, and saw the same fear reflected in all of them. That evening, David found Grace sitting on the steps of her mother's house, staring into the distance. I heard about the land, he said, sitting beside her. Grace nodded. 3 months. Then we're homeless. Where will you go? I don't know. Mama has a sister in Ibadan, but she's got her own problems. And with the baby coming... Grace's voice trailed off. David was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that surprised her. What if you didn't have to leave? Grace looked at him. What do you mean? What if there was another way? There is no other way. They bought the land. We have to go. David stood up, brushed off his trousers. Sometimes things aren't as final as they seem. Grace watched him walk away, confused by his words. How could things not be final? The land was sold. Their fate was sealed. But something in David's voice made her wonder if he knew something she didn't. That night, she lay awake listening to her mother's worried whispers on the phone with relatives, trying to find somewhere for them to go. Through the window, she could see the lights still on in the boys' quarters. Who was David really? And why did he talk like someone who had more power than his patched clothes suggested? 2 weeks after the land sale announcement, Daniel returned to the village. He drove up in a brand new car, music blasting, windows down, acting like he owned the world. Grace was hanging clothes on the line when she saw him. Her hands froze on the wet shirt she was holding. Her heart started racing, but not with love this time, with fear. Daniel parked in front of her house and got out slowly, deliberately. He was dressed in expensive clothes, his hair freshly cut, his shoes shining. He looked like money. Grace, he called out, his voice carrying that old charm that had once made her weak in the knees. She didn't answer. She continued hanging clothes, her hands shaking slightly. Daniel walked closer. I heard about the land sale. Tough luck. Grace finally looked at him. What do you want, Daniel? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Can't a man check on an old friend? We were never friends. Daniel's smile faltered slightly. Look, Grace, I know things ended badly between us, but I've been thinking, maybe we can work something out. Work what out? Come with me to Lagos. I've got a good thing going there. I can take care of you. Grace almost laughed. Take care of me? Like you took care of me before? That was different. I was young, stupid. I've grown up now. Where's Precious? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. She's busy. University things. Grace understood. Precious was probably getting tired of him too, or maybe she had found someone richer. What about the baby? Grace asked quietly. Daniel's face changed. The fake charm disappeared, replaced with something cold and calculating. What baby? Grace's heart sunk. She had hoped, foolishly, that maybe he had come back because he knew, because he cared. Never mind, she whispered. Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Grace, you need to be smart about this. The village is finished. Your mother is old. You're going to struggle. But I can give you a good life. Just think about it. Before Grace could respond, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see David approaching, his face calm, but his eyes alert. Is everything all right, Grace? David asked. Daniel looked at David with obvious disdain. And you are who? David said simply. A friend. Daniel laughed. A friend who dresses like a beggar? David didn't react to the insult. He just stood there, solid and calm, like a wall between Grace and Daniel. Grace doesn't need your help, Daniel said to David. This is between me and her. Actually, Grace said, finding her voice, there is no me and you. There never was. Daniel's face darkened. You're making a mistake, Grace. I won't ask again. Good, Grace said. Don't. Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then at David. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. We'll see about that, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked back to his car. As he drove away, Grace felt her legs shaking. David reached out to steady her. Who was that? He asked. The father of my baby, and the biggest mistake I ever made. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. Daniel's visit had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Not because she still had feelings for him, but because she recognized something in his eyes. Desperation. And desperate men were dangerous men. She got up and walked to the window. In the boys' quarters, David's light was still on. Before she could talk herself out of it, she slipped outside and knocked on his door. Grace? David opened the door, concern written on his face. What's wrong? I can't sleep. I keep thinking about Daniel, about what he might do. David stepped aside to let her in. The small room was neat, almost empty except for a simple bed, a chair, and a small bag in the corner. But Grace noticed something odd. On the table was an expensive-looking laptop, sleek and new. It seemed out of place with everything else. That's a nice laptop, she said. David glanced at it, then quickly closed it. I borrowed it for work. Grace didn't push, but she filed the detail away in her mind. Tell me about Daniel, David said, sitting on the chair while Grace perched on the edge of the bed. Grace told him everything, about the promises, the betrayal, the way Daniel had looked at her today like she was a possession he could claim whenever he wanted. He's not going to give up, she said finally. I know him. When he wants something, he gets it. And now that the village is being sold and people are desperate, he thinks I'll have no choice. David was quiet for a long time. Then he asked a question that surprised her. What if the village wasn't being sold? Grace looked at him. What do you mean? What if someone bought it instead? Someone who would let people stay? Grace laughed bitterly. With what money? Chief Adebayo said they were asking for billions. None of us have that kind of money. But what if someone did? David, you're talking about impossible things. People like us don't have billions. We don't even have thousands. David stood up and walked to the window. Grace, what if I told you that sometimes the impossible becomes possible? That sometimes help comes from places you least expect it? I'd say you sound like you're trying to give me false hope. David turned back to her. What if it wasn't false? Grace studied his face. There was something in his expression, something he wasn't telling her. David, who are you really? He said,
I'm someone who believes that good people deserve good things, and I'm someone who has learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's right. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Not fear, but anticipation, like she was standing on the edge of something big. "What are you planning?" she asked. David smiled. "I'm planning to make sure you and your mother have a home, and that men like Daniel learn they can't take whatever they want."
The next morning, David was gone before sunrise. Grace found a note on her door. Gone to Lagos for work. Back in 3 days. Stay safe. D. Grace spent those 3 days in a strange state of anticipation and worry. Daniel didn't return, but she heard rumors that he was still in the village, staying with friends, asking questions about her and David. On the second day, her mother Faith made an observation that stopped Grace cold. "That young man," Faith said as they prepared dinner, "there's something different about him." "What do you mean?" "His hands," Faith said. "Have you looked at his hands?" Grace frowned. "What about them?" "They're soft. Too soft for someone who works with his hands. And his teeth are too straight, too white. That's expensive dental work." Grace felt her heart skip. "What are you saying, Mama?" "I'm saying that boy is not who he pretends to be. The question is, who is he really?" That night, Grace couldn't stop thinking about her mother's words. She remembered the laptop, the way David walked, the confidence in his voice when he talked about impossible things becoming possible. On the third day, David returned, but he wasn't alone. Grace was sweeping the compound when a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of her house. David got out of the first one, but he looked different. Gone were the patched clothes and worn shoes. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt, dark trousers, and leather shoes that probably cost more than her family's monthly income. Behind him came several men in suits, all carrying briefcases and looking very official. Grace dropped her broom. David walked up to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked nervous. "Grace," he said, "we need to talk." "Who are you?" she whispered. Before he could answer, Chief Adebayo came hurrying over, drawn by the sight of the expensive cars. Behind him came half the village, all curious and worried. One of the suited men stepped forward. "Chief Adebayo, I'm Mr. Johnson, legal representative for Mr. David Adeleke. We need to discuss the land sale." Grace's head was spinning. David Adeleke? She had never heard David's last name before, but something about it sounded familiar. Chief Adebayo looked confused. "I don't understand. The land has already been sold to Lagos Resort Development Company." Mr. Johnson smiled. "That's what we need to discuss. There's been a development." David caught Grace's eye. In his expression, she saw apology, hope, and something that looked like love. "Grace," he said quietly while the crowd gathered around the lawyers, "I can explain everything." But Grace was already backing away, her mind reeling with the implications of what she was seeing. David wasn't just some passing stranger. He was someone with money, power, lawyers in expensive suits. Which meant everything she thought she knew about him was a lie.